Hello, hello, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Hey,
Hey,
uh,
Jonah.
hello, Shama. How you doing?
Good, thanks. Nice to meet you.
You as well. We are so excited to have you here. For everyone watching,
Awesome.
my name is Jonah. This is Ari, aka Xiaoma. Super excited to have him here today. I'm personally super excited to learn some Chinese. It's been a while since I dipped into it at all, and I'm sure this will be a fantastic refresher. Uh, Real quick before we get hopping into anything, just want to make sure everyone can see and hear us, that we're sounding and looking good. So if you can pop in to the comments, let us know that you can see and hear us. Feel free to call out where you're tuning in from, something you're excited to learn. You can see a lot of people are already popping in. We got people from Tulsa, all the way from Texas. This is awesome. From Poland.
Wow.
That is awesome. We
Poland, shout out.
So, yeah, closer to China than I am, but yeah.
I think my
Uh,
great grandma came from Poland.
I mean, I'm a
I think
Euro nut.
everybody has a great
Yeah,
grandma
yeah.
from Poland. Right.
If you're from
Yeah.
Europe, probably someone
Yeah,
from
yeah, yeah.
Poland. It looks like everyone's hearing us, and that's all cruising. So that's all good. I just want to set a couple expectations for today. If Chelma is going too quick for anything, don't fret. We're going to have a replay available both on the YouTube page, the Discover event page, and it will also be emailed to you if you RSVP'd for the event. So fret not if things are moving fast. Also, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them in the chat. But we will have a dedicated Q&A section at the end. So if you can hold on, that'll ensure we're more able to answer the question. But if you just need to ask it, feel free to pop it in there and we'll try and get to it at the end. And then also just to give a proper introduction, today we have Arieh Smith, aka Xiaoma. He's going to teach us how to speak Mandarin Chinese in 1 hour. And a couple things we can expect to learn today. We can learn to go from our first sentences in Chinese in under 60 minutes and surprise our Chinese friends, and learn 100% practical and useful phrases we can use in daily life. Arieh Smith, aka Xiaoma, is a video creator with over 5 million fans across social media. He is known for his viral videos where he shocks Chinese people in New York's Chinatown with his perfect Chinese. Perfect Chinese. Xiaoma, I don't want to take up any more time. Should we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start learning some Chinese.
Love it.
Okay, so Jonah, can you be my guinea pig for this? I want to try to
I'm here for
teach you Mandarin Chinese. So, I get asked this question all the time, like what is Chinese? Like, is it okay to say Chinese? Like, I know there's a bunch of different types of Chinese. That's true, right? We have Cantonese, we have Mandarin, we have Fujianese, we have Wu Chinese, we have Shanghai, we have just a bunch of different types and branches of Chinese. It's probably as diverse as like European languages, The difference is that pretty much everybody at this point in China speaks Mandarin, and Chinese people themselves often in their own language in Chinese refer to Mandarin as Chinese. So the terms are somewhat interchangeable in that context. Obviously, if you want to talk about Cantonese, you say Cantonese. So today we're going to be learning Mandarin, and let's just get started. So Mandarin, we have the first thing that we have to know about Mandarin is that there are tones, right?
Right.
And you might be like, what are tones? That sounds complicated. Basically, when you speak in Mandarin, every vowel, every sound is going to have an associated tone or a pitch, right? So there's 4 of them, and they go like this. First tone is ma, second tone is ma, third tone is ma, fourth tone is ma. Right?
Okay, can you hit me with that third one again?
Yeah. So the third one, slowly, it sounds like ma. Ma.
Oh, so like a down up?
Yeah, there's a down up, down up. But really, in fact, and people get really in most normal speech, it's just a low note. So ma.
Oh,
ma.
Yeah. Gotcha. Which differs from just the straight straight.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So the first tone is ma. The third tone is ma. Right. So ma and ma.
Love
and
it.
If right now, if you're listening to this and you're like, ma, what's the difference? I can't hear the difference. That's okay. That's most people's experience, right? It takes a little bit of time to really get familiar. But the good news is that once you get over that like initial difficulty hump of the tones, the rest of Chinese, there's a lot of it that is easier than you might expect, right? So like verbs don't conjugate, and we're gonna go through a dialogue pretty soon actually, where I can show you how Chinese grammar actually in a lot of ways is quite simple relative to English. So but let's, Jonah, do you want to try giving us the four tones?
Okay,
Having just heard that.
We got ma, ma,
Ma, it's rising.
Ma,
Yeah.
ma, and ma.
Ma.
That's the down one. Okay.
Right. Can you? So I want to draw out how they're typically represented. Can you bring up the
absolutely.
the screen? Okay. So this is the dialogue. We'll get into it in just a second. I want to write out how these words. So if you look in here, let me zoom in and see if we can see. So if we zoom in here, right, you can see how above the vowels we have these little like squigglies.
Yep.
Over here, right? So Chinese is written with, and you see below over here, right? We have these characters, right? You've all seen Chinese characters before, probably at some point if you're interested in Chinese. But the way that we learn Chinese is through these letters here, right? Which is called Pinyin, right? That word in Chinese is Pin with a first tone, Yin with another first tone. So when we write Pinyin, we can write the first tone as like a number. Yeah, Pinyin. Or you'll see it like this. It's a little bit harder to type this on a keyboard, but the I will look like this, and then the second I will look like this, right? So first. So let me write these out, right? So this is first tone, right? And that's just your high note. Ma. I'm at a high note. If I were speaking everything in first tone, it would sound like this. We're all in first tone now. This is second tone. Ma. So it comes from a lower point to a higher point, right? If I was speaking everything in second tone, this is how it would sound. So you get the point, right? Third tone. Yeah. Ma. So there is, as you noted, Jonah, it goes down, ma, and then it comes back up, right? But the thing is usually, and if you watch like tutorials on the internet, they'll all say like, oh yeah, it's ma. But really in, colloquial speech, it's really just about hitting that like low note, right? So ma. Yeah. So, and then the last tone is ma. So try that. Ma. Right. So it's falling, right? It's like you're criticizing somebody. Actually, M-A, sorry, that's pretty gross. M-A, like this, M-A fourth tone, is actually the word to criticize somebody. So ma, like to criticize somebody.
Oh, okay.
Right. So, any questions about that so far?
No, I think the visual helps a lot.
Yeah, and also it helps too. I mean, again, tones I think are, if Mandarin is not the only tonal language in the world. There's others like Vietnamese, Yoruba, whatever. But Mandarin is, I think, one that people are familiar with, and it's an interesting experience when you're learning the language, because as English speakers we tend not to think in this way. But then really when you learn Mandarin, it's important to kind of almost like feel the letters in like a musical sense, right? So let me give you an example. So we'll take a look here at our first sentence, right, of this dialogue, because the whole point of this lesson, and my Chinese course in general, is to teach you how to start talking immediately. And we could go through all the letters one by one, but I think it's more fun to try to solve problems as we encounter them, and just work through this sentence by sentence. So there is one more thing though that I do need to mention before we go right into the first sentence, which is that with tones in Chinese, there's something weird called tone sandhi, which is it sounds a little strange. Basically what it is that when we have two third tones together, right? So let's say, remember, our third tone is ma, or just low tone ma, ma, right?
Right.
Really low tone. If everything we were speaking in third tone, it would sound like this. This is the low tone. When you have two of those together, the Chinese language tends to be like cooties, and we don't want to have two third tones next to each other. So what happens is that the first third tone will turn into a second tone. So if we have ma and ma together, instead of saying ma, we say ma. Mama. Right, exactly.
Okay.
Mama. Perfect.
So is that in the same word, or, for example, like we have in the first sentence where they're right next to each other?
Yeah, so it could be, even in the same word. And I'll give you an example that may be relevant, which is that my Chinese name, right, is actually, you can see that right here, right? Xiaoma, right? So that's, if you notice, that's two third tones together. But if you listen carefully, how that's pronounced is xiaoma, right? There's two third tones, as you can see from this little tones here, right? But it's not xiaoma, it's xiaoma, right? Gotcha. Xiaoma, second tone, third tone, second tone, third tone.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so our first sentence here is something that people may be familiar with or may not be, which is ni hao. Try to say that after me, Jonah, and also everybody who's listening. If you want to participate, try saying it along. So cool. Yeah, ni hao.
Ni hao.
Perfect. Ni hao.
Cool.
Great.
Ni hao.
Yeah. So you're doing great, Jonah. I have. You're a musician, right?
Yes. Yes.
So it definitely helps if you have like a musical background, because or you have an interest in music, because this is it's like a very musical kind of thing here.
Right.
So ni hao is literally what that means is we have ni means you, and hao means, let me make this a little bit thinner. Hao means good. So literally it means like you good, right?
And
or like
a greeting, right? Like,
it's a greeting. It's a greeting, right? So it's how you say hello. People in China will say hello too as well, like hello. But ni hao is just like the basic default Chinese way to say hello, the default Mandarin way, right? In Cantonese is lei ho, right? But in Mandarin we have ni hao.
Cool.
So xiaoma says ni hao. And if you're following along, try to repeat this. Xiaoma ni hao.
Xiaoma ni hao.
That means hello, xiaoma. Xiaoma ni hao.
Cool.
Xiaoma ni hao. Cool. And then so our next line of dialogue, right? We have ni hao. Ni hao. Ni hao. Right? Ni hao. Again, same thing. Hello. Xiaoma says hello. And then we have the second character here, Xiaoming, right? Which is just another name. Literally, by the way, if you're curious, and people ask me this all the time too, like xiaoma, what does xiaoma actually mean? So the word xiao, right over here, this first one, xiao, right? Xiao, third tone, means little or small. And ma means horse.
Little horse.
Little horse, right?
Love it.
Yeah, and the cool thing about Chinese too is that this isn't, and my course isn't particularly a course about Chinese characters, which are amazing and beautiful, and if you have interest, definitely go and study them. But the cool thing about Chinese characters is that a lot of them are actually ideograms or pictograms, you could maybe call them, where the character looks like the thing. So over here, right, you see Xiaoma. This is my name in Chinese. And the ma here, this is the simplified character. We have traditional and simplified characters in Chinese. It's a very long discussion. But this is the traditional character. And the idea is that this was a representation of a horse. That was, that's actually a little horse. Yeah, right? It's really cool. It's really cool. And this, to me, this was like the first thing that really like drew me in about Chinese. When I realized that like the characters were like these like ancient things that had evolved over time to like, I was like, my mind was blown. I was like, this is amazing, so cool. So yeah,
that's wild.
Yeah, super cool. So we have anyway. So you're saying ni hao, hello, ni hao. Now we have this next line, right? So let's actually, before we go into this line, one note about the pronunciation of this H here. The H in Chinese, and people sometimes get this wrong. It's not, it's not like silent like Spanish, and it's a little different sound than it is in English. It's slightly aspirated. So it's a little bit of like a h sound. So it's ni hao, almost. Ni hao. Ni hao. Yeah, a little bit of like a guttural thing going on.
A little more back in the throat than like English. H.
Exactly. And that'll help you pronounce a lot of other words with H. And another note about Pinyin, and relative to characters, people sometimes have this misimpression of Chinese, where like if you look at Chinese characters, like over here, right, you might be under the impression that like every character is a word, right? Every character is a unit of meaning, where that's not the case. In Chinese, what we have is every character does correspond to one unit of pinyin, right? So like this character over here, this is Ni third tone, right? This character over here is Hao third tone, right? Like, this character over here is Wo third tone, right? So every character does correspond to one unit of pinyin, but not every, like, Chinese doesn't put spaces between words when you're writing with characters, but it does with pinyin, right? So like if we take a look at, this sentence over here, which we're going to go into in a second, you can see that, for example, some of these words, like each one, like this is a word here, right? Ni, that's a word. Over here, hui, that's another word, right? But which is one character. Shuo, that's another word. That's again a one character word. Zhongwen, that's a two character word, right? So if you look at the characters over here, we have two characters over here, right? And there's two units of pinyin, but they combine to make one word. So it doesn't really make sense in this context to look at it like zhong, what does zhong mean and what does wen mean, right? They're two really inseparable units in this case. It's just one semantic unit.
Gotcha. So Pinyin makes it much easier to tackle this at first.
Yes, it does. And that's why I recommend that people who are English speakers, like who aren't, if you're Japanese, it's a little bit of a different story because you already kind of get this. But if you don't have any exposure to to languages with Chinese characters before, I really recommend just starting with Pinyin at first, because it makes it easier to understand the language as a spoken language. And then once you kind of have some grasp of the spoken language, then you can kind of come in and learn the characters and layer that onto what you've already learned.
Gotcha. Sorry, real quick. We have a couple people asking if we can make it just a little bigger. Bigger. Or just zoom in a little more on the...
Okay.
With what space we got. Love it. Cool.
Okay. So we're at the next sentence.
Am I supposed to say this?
Yeah. So yes, eventually. So we can do this. Let's just do the whole thing first.
Cool.
你会说中文吗？
你会说中文吗？
Not bad. Yeah. Okay. Not bad. Let's maybe go over each of these individually. So we have the first one, ni here, right? Yes, and we've already seen ni, right? We know that's you. Hui, right? Hui is an interesting word. Hui means to be able.
Okay.
Hui, yeah, it means to be able in the sense of like a skill, right? Hui. Shuo, try pronouncing that. Shuo, good. Right? A lot of people, you're pronouncing it well. A lot of people, this is a word that a lot of people have trouble with. It sounds like it sounds like this. You're seeing this type. Shuo, yeah, it sounds like a shuo. Like if you have like a thick Long Island accent and you pronounce the word water, that's a shuo. Yeah.
Chinese with a Boston accent.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of these like northeastern US accents. So shuo, right? So Ni hui, right? And the hui is again fourth tone, so we're going down ni. It helps with these tones if you think about it, like your if you do the hand movements, it helps a little be physical, right? So
Okay.
ni hui shuo, ni hui shuo.
Ni hui shuo.
Perfect, exactly.
Okay.
Ni hui shuo, that's great.
Ni hui shuo.
Great.
Okay.
Now, ni hui shuo, the next word is
Zong wen.
zong. So you're pronouncing it actually. So technically, in standard Mandarin, at least in the Beijing standard, it's pronounced zhong, zhong, zhong.
Zhong.
Yeah.
Zhong. So almost like a ch. Zhong.
No, like a J.
Oh,
There is a separate
zhong.
ch in Chinese.
Okay.
So it's almost like zhong or not. Sorry, the autocorrect.
Oh, autocorrect.
It's like jiong or zhong or something like that. Might be a better transcription into English.
Zhong.
But but it really is a deep sound. So it's like a yeah. Right.
Zhong.
Perfect. Exactly.
Zhong.
So zhong, right? And first tone, so it's zhong. Yeah.
Zhong.
And notice that it's also first tone, so it's the same as the previous word. Shuo, zhong.
Right.
So
Shuo, zhong.
So they're just going to go into each other. And then the next one is wen.
Wen.
So rising tone, right? Zhong wen.
Zhong wen.
Mm-hmm. And ma.
Ma.
Now you notice that there's no tone marking over this ma here. And that's because there is also, I said there were 4 tones in Mandarin. Maybe you could argue there's 5 because one of them is a neutral tone, which basically means it's not, it doesn't have a tone. It's just kind of like mid-level, just floating around there, right?
So is it like a little shorter than like tone 1, or
it's less high? So like, for example, if we were saying ma and then the neutral tone next to it, mama, it would be kind of like that, mama. And actually, the word mama in Chinese is actually mama. It is actually ma first tone, or we could also write it like this, right? Ma first tone, another ma. So this is the Chinese word for mother, is mama. See how that sounds? Mama. Exactly.
Mama.
So you can hear that the second tone there is, or the second ma there is a neutral tone, and it's a little bit lower than the first tone. If they were both first tone, it would sound like mama. Compare that with mama and mama. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's it's nice that I know first tono is like, it appears to be like a long held out thing, but it's more about where in your vocal spectrum you're hitting.
Yeah, right? It's not about how long it's pronounced for. It's about the pitch.
Gotcha.
So it's just a higher note. So it's ma versus ma and ma, right? Ma. That would be ma first tone, ma middle tone, ma low tone. Third tone, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I just wanted to pop a question up here because it's pretty relevant and it may answer a few questions about Pinyin. But JP Ford, 1977, is asking, why is the sound represented with an O instead of like schwa, like it is pronounced? I assume that's like part of just Pinyin in general, that it's tackled like that.
Yeah. So the Pinyin is a set of I guess is a standardized way of transcribing the Mandarin language, right? So 50 years ago, 100 years ago, people came up with these sound schemes to represent how Chinese, because Chinese there was never any, Pinyin didn't exist until like 100 years ago, roughly, right? So, or 200, people only started romanizing, it's called, right? Putting the characters into the Latin letters. That didn't happen until relatively recently in the history of the Chinese language. So before that, it was just all characters, and people just knew how it was pronounced because they grew up pronouncing it like that, right? But so at some point, people decided, hey, for teaching this to kids and for foreigners, it would be a good idea to to have some standardized ways of writing this. And in fact, we can see this actually in some terms that people watching this might be familiar with. So I don't know if anyone has heard of Szechuan food, like Szechuanese restaurants, right? Like Szechuanese food. This actually comes from an older way of writing the Chinese language called Wei Giles. The current way to do it in Pinyin, and people still use Wei Giles, but the more common way right now is Sichuan. It's pronounced.
Sichuan.
Yeah, Sichuan. I mean, not the real pronunciation doesn't vary. It's always been Sichuan. It's just that the powers that be decided to write it like this. And another example that again people might be familiar with is Peking for the capital of China, right? So this was changed to, in modern Pinyin, Beijing. Right? Yeah.
Okay.
And the idea is it's supposed to be a more accurate way of representing the sounds. Whether it is accurate, that's really up to you to decide. But the point is that schwa is pronounced like this kind of W sound. There is actually, so the commenter asked, why isn't it written as SHUA? There is actually an SHUA in Mandarin that's pronounced schwa.
Oh, okay.
Schwa. Yeah. Schwa. So listen to these two sounds. Schwa versus schwa versus schwa. Schwa versus schwa. Schwa versus schwa. So you can hear the difference there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's used elsewhere. Gotcha.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
Cool. Didn't mean to go down a total tangent there, but yeah.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I love it.
Yeah.
So let's so we have 你会说中文吗? Right, the sentence here. We've gone over a couple of these words. 你 means you, 会 means to be able, 说 means to speak. 中文 is a 2-character word or a 2 pinyin sound word. 中文, and it means the Chinese language, right? And specifically it means Chinese, but don't confuse it to mean like Chinese people or Chinese whatever. It specifically means just the language. Yeah.
Got you. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. 中文, and ma is something we don't have in English. It is a question indicator. Can you figure out what this means, Jonah?
So do you speak Chinese?
Right. So literally it means you speak, you are able to speak Chinese? Question? Right, exactly. So the ma is almost like a question mark, but specifically for yes, no questions. Specific to yes, no question. So if like you were to ask somebody why or how, you wouldn't use this ma.
Oh,
and
okay.
We'll actually see an example of that later.
Well, because like question marks don't exist in actual character Chinese, right? I know they're down there at the moment, but like traditionally they.
Yes, traditionally Chinese was not written with actually any punctuation. It was written top to bottom, right to left, without punctuation. Just everything just kind of ran together. But in fact, in Taiwan, you can still see like books are still often printed like that. But in mainland China, they're typically things are now written left to right with this type of punctuation that we're familiar with in English. It's not exactly the same, and like things in Chinese in Chinese punctuation tend to be full width, which is that like you'll see here like a comma will take up the full width of a character just for like printing and orthographic reasons, but yeah, that's a whole separate discussion.
Right. Cool. Cheers. Yeah.
So you are able to speak Chinese, and this is really easy, right? Because like the in English we have you like in English basically you have to rearrange the order of the sentence when we ask a question, right? So like you are able to speak Chinese is different from are you able to speak Chinese, right? In Chinese, we don't have that. We don't rearrange the order. We just add a ma onto the end of the sentence, and it becomes an interrogative yes/no question. And the other cool thing about that is that it's at first it might be hard to be like, oh, how do I ask this question? But it's different from English. But all you have to do is add the ma, and it becomes a question. And this actually enables you to form sentences very easily because Now I bet you know how to say you can speak Chinese.
你会说中文?
Exactly. 你会说中文.你会说中文.你会说中文 means you can speak Chinese. 你会说中文 versus 你会说中文吗 means can you speak Chinese? Right?
Oh, that's really nice. That's
exactly.
Low key.
It's super nice. It's really low key. There in English we have you are able. We have this other word are. We don't have that in Chinese. We literally just have you able speak Chinese. Right? So a lot of these little filler words to indicate like the infinitive and to indicate extra pronouns, we don't have these in Chinese, which actually makes it in a lot of ways really nice to form sentences.
Right. I'm sure it takes a second to wrap your head around.
Yes, it does.
Actually simpler.
Yeah. To be fair, not everything in Chinese is simpler,
right.
But there is some stuff that is very nice, and the grammar is one of them. So,
cool.
Should we go on to the next sentence?
Yeah.
Okay. So now, 你会说中文吗? So hello, we've gone back from 你好, hello. 你会说中文吗? 你会说中文吗? Can you speak Chinese? Right? Are you able to speak Chinese? And now we jump into our next sentence, which is 对，我会说中文。对，我会说中文。
对，我会说中文。
Perfect, exactly. 对，我会说中文。But you might notice something about this sentence, which is that it's very similar to the last sentence, right? So if you understand what the last sentence was, you can probably figure out what this means.
I can speak Chinese.
Right. We just didn't introduce if you scroll down, this is just the first lesson from my course, but if you scroll down to the vocab section, we have all the relevant vocab and stuff. But yeah, so what is either it's either I or me, right?
Okay.
Another nice thing about Chinese, the I is the same as me. It doesn't change. It's always just I, me. The word for mine you would also form using the same character. So it's really nice and simple in that respect.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Why
totally
do we
does.
need multiple words for just who I am?
I know. and the cool thing is, especially if you've never studied any other languages before, once you start learning Chinese, you'll just be like, why do we do it like this in English? Like, this is like, why do we need all this extra filler? Like, this stuff is really nice. So yeah, go ahead.
So dui,
yeah.
Dui,
which rhymes with hui.
Okay, so dui means, if I can guess, yes.
Yeah, dui means Dui means yes.
Okay.
Yes, cool. Or correct. There are certain. Yes is one of those words a little bit tricky in Chinese because there isn't like a one-to-one correspondence with the way you say yes in English. Gotcha. But yeah, dui just means like right. Like that is true. So 你会说中文吗? 对, right? And that UI sound is like a whey sound, like whey protein or the right way, those kind of things. 对, so yes, 我会说中文, I can speak Chinese.
我会说中文。我会说中文。
Perfect. 我会说中文。Exactly. So great. So Xiaoming asks us a question. 你会说中文吗? Can you speak Chinese? And Xiaoma says, 对，我会说中文. Yes, I can speak Chinese. Okay. Now for our next sentence. You might be able to figure out what that is. It's just kind of like a little.
Or really?
Yeah, right. Surprise. Really? What's going on? Yeah. Yes, really? Okay. 你怎么会说中文? So
你怎么会说中文?
Right. 你怎么 the tones at the end. Let's work on this a little bit.
We have the two.
Yes.
Number threes.
Exactly.
Okay.
We have double number threes over here. Exactly. Right. So remember, we have two third tones together. So what happens is 你怎么 Right.
怎么
Yeah.
And that's the neutral tone. Okay.
Yes, it is, right?
怎么
So the zen is like a little bit down there, and the m kind of pops up a little bit. 怎么 Right. So here's how it works.
Okay.
So, and 怎么 means how how in like, how do I do this? How do I say this? Or it can just mean how in the sense that we have in English, like, how comes it that how come you can do this, or how come you can speak Chinese? Those kinds of things.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you can wait. So okay. So here's a question.
Yeah.
Though, and maybe you already kind of answered it. This doesn't have a ma at the end, so how would we know this is a question?
Right. Yeah. So this is what I was talking about in the sentence with the ma over here. Ma is only for yes or no questions.
Okay, so this
Yeah.
right, because this is like a how do you know Chinese question?
Right. Exactly. So
Gotcha.
because this is like
Love it.
ma is only used for questions that can be answered with either a yes or a no.
Gotcha.
So the question, in this case, 怎么 means how. So literally what this means is, and because in Chinese, remember, we don't rephrase the question. You don't have to rephrase the whole sentence in order to indicate a question, which again is confusing to us from an English perspective at first, but actually once you learn it, really makes a lot of sense, and it's actually very intuitive. So what this literally means is, you how can speak Chinese. So the 怎么 is almost like an adverb, right? And it doesn't. It's like not. We don't put it at the beginning of a sentence. It's just like an adverb. 你怎么会说中文 means how can you speak Chinese?
Okay. 你怎么会说中文?
Right.
I'm sure my tones are.
No. That's actually
You
pretty good.
speak it
Yeah.
so quick. It's.
Let's do that one more time. A
Yeah.
little more slowly. 你怎么会说中文?
你怎么会说中文?
So the only one that was very good. The only thing was the last one. 中文.
中文.
Perfect. So
中文.
Yeah. So 你怎么会说中文?
你怎么会说中文?
Great. And the when at the end, make it a little bit more rising. 中文.
中文.
When. Perfect. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's that trips me up. But when you're going, it's not so much going from where you are to higher. You like dip a little and come back up for that.
Yeah. Right. It's not like zhong is first one. It's not like zhong wen. It's
right.
Zhong down.
I'm like Valley Girl in Chinese.
Right. Zhong wen. Right. No, you're zhong wen. Zhong wen. Like you're like a boxer and you're like dipping.
Right.
Zhong wen. Zhong wen.
Love it.
Right.
Okay.
That's the idea.
Cool.
So
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, just saying I love it. Yeah, it's making more and more sense.
Yeah. Okay. So now for our last sentence, which is yin wei.
Yin wei.
Right. Yin wei, and yin wei means because.
Okay.
Yin wei means because. And the only thing with the pronunciation here is that the W sometimes, particularly like northern Chinese speakers, will pronounce it like a V sound. So it'll be like yin wei, yin wei.
Yin wei.
But yeah, yin wei. And also another thing is sometimes this Y is going to be like silent. So it's more like yin wei, yin wei. So it can be yin or like a y. You can have the y or not. It can be like yin wei or yin wei.
Is that really like regional?
Yeah, it's very regional, and also like Chinese people tend to be very forgiving with your pronunciation. So don't worry if you're not pronouncing it absolutely perfect, because the thing is, within China itself, there are so many regional, and not just even within China, by the way. I'm just like around the world, wherever, like even in New York City, Chinatown, there are varieties, different ways that people pronounce things. So different, especially because lots of people who speak Mandarin learn it as their second language, right? Effectively, like if you grow up in like like let's say Western China, or if you grow up in like a minority part of China, or just speaking like another Chinese language like Fujianese or Cantonese, it's not necessarily your first language. So you might speak with an accent, and that's totally fine, right? There are differences in pronunciation. And for example, one thing I wanted to mention was that originally, Zhongwen, remember this word meaning Chinese language? Mm-hmm. You pronounced it like Zhongwen without the heavy like zh, like Zhongwen or Zhongwen, right? Mm-hmm. That's actually an acceptable pronunciation, and lots of Chinese people, particularly Southern Chinese people, pronounce it like that. It's like Zhongwen. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so it kind of depends on region. Okay.
Yeah, it's very regional. But so anyway, back to what we have here. We have 因为 meaning
Yinwei,
because, right? 因为我学中文啊，
Yinwei, 我学
我
Zhongwen,
so that let's the 我学 try that 我学
我学
better, much better, because
Okay.
the key to remember is that the 学 kind of rises from where the low tone ends. So it's like
Gotcha.
我学
我学
great 我
我
学 perfect
中文啊
中文呢 right
Oh, 中文
yeah it's a little higher
that's
right so it's
right.
almost like a roller coaster analogy if you envision like
Yeah.
我学中我学中我学中
Okay, 我学中
great exactly
Okay. That like J sound is just one we don't
Yeah.
have in English. It's a trip.
right and it's fine if you want to pronounce it like zhong. I know that is hard to pronounce. If you want to pronounce it like a zhong, like a j, like a kind of softer z or a j sound, it's okay too, and people will understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Zhongwen.
Zhongwen. Well, I
Mhm.
imagine this is obviously a generalization,
Yeah.
but I imagine they have very good ears too.
You know,
From growing up with a language like this.
yeah, and actually there have been studies about this that compare the prevalence of perfect pitch in among people who grow up speaking tonal languages and those that don't. So like they find that perfect pitch is like just being able to pick out what a note is, just having heard it once, is much higher in China than it is in the US.
Huh.
And they hypothesize that one reason for that is actually people growing up speaking a tonal language. It kind of trains your ears to pick out pitch better. And I always thought that was like so interesting. I was like, wow.
Yeah,
really?
what a trip.
So cool. I know it's so cool to think like that. But
Cool. So the one word I don't think we know here is shui.
yes, 学, right, which means to learn or to study. Mm-hmm. So this means because I study Chinese, right? Or am studying. Again, Chinese is very like their verbs aren't really conjugated. So you know, study, studied, am studying. You're all going to use the same form of the verb here.
Love it. I really like that aspect.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And then the at the end, is that just like accentuating that?
Yeah, it's like a surprise. It's like a because I'm learning Chinese.
Okay. There, la la. Yeah.
Because that is why. And now I have told you. So, yeah.
Here, real quick, we've had this question a couple times, so let's just pop up, and then if it's relevant for the Q&A or something else, we can. But asking to explain the particle.
Particle. Which particle?
And at
the end?
That's where I'm wondering, Josto, if you're asking at the end the so if you can, we'll see if we can come back to that when they reply.
Yeah,
but that's come up with a few people there. So yeah.
So yeah, just to recap this dialogue, right? We have 你好, which means hello, right? And we have another 你好, hello. 你会说中文吗? Can you speak Chinese? Right? Remember, you able to speak Chinese? Yes, no? Right? 对, yes. 我会说中文. I am able to speak Chinese, the Chinese language. What? Surprise? 你怎么会说中文? 你怎么会说中文? You how are able to speak Chinese, right? How are you able to speak Chinese? 因为 because 因为我学中文啊. 因为我学中文啊. Because I study Chinese. That is the obvious reason. Because I study Chinese.
Quick question with shui. Would you pronounce that the same if it wasn't next to wo?
No, it's pronounced the same. One thing I did forget to mention about 学 this is important. The X sound in Chinese, and this is something that people ask all about the time. X? Whoa, my brain is blown. What's going on? Why is there an X here? X is pronounced. It's a little bit tricky. It's the closest analogy we have in English is an SH. But you have to be careful because in Chinese there is already an SH. In Mandarin there's an SH. The S. Remember we have this schwa word, right? That's
okay,
right? Yeah, it's actually it rhymes with ZH, right? So the ZH here in Zhongwen is zh 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 zh, right? The SH is sh 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 zh sh. So it's a deeper sh. Your mouth, your tongue is kind of like a little bit back towards the middle of your mouth. Sh sh. So it's a little deeper sound. Whereas in the X here, the X is it's a very dental sound. So like your tongue is right up near your teeth. So it's like almost like a lispy sound a little bit, like xue, xue, almost like you're whistling. Yeah. Xue, xue, xue. Yeah.
Okay.
You're pronouncing it very well. For a lot of people, it is a difficult sound to pronounce, though. And so I think it's okay. If you just pronounce it like an English SH, most people will understand. If you just said, 我学中文, that's like, okay. You know, people will still understand, right?
Right.
学, you don't have to necessarily pronounce it so like whistly and like kind of like a more native way.
Yeah. Well, so the Rosanna was saying it's similar to the CH in German. I speak a little German, so I just I was thinking the same thing, but it's still a little more. It sounds like it's closer to the teeth with the tongue.
Yeah,
correct?
It is closer to the teeth and a little bit more whistly sound.
Okay.
But yeah.
Cool. Wow. Okay.
Sweet.
Hey, we learned some Chinese.
We learned some Chinese, and now you have this conversation that you can take and try going and practicing with people.
Yeah, and so what was I gonna? Oh,
I use this as my first conversation in my course because, like the whole philosophy that I have with language learning is really that it's best to learn first the stuff that you might encounter first, and it's kind of like playing a chess game where, you know, if you have any experience playing chess, it's like there's a set of standard openings where if you learn chess, like everybody learns the same openings, like, you know, pawn e2 to e4, and then black responds pawn, you know, d2 to d4, whatever the notation is, and then there's like a set of standard moves, and then the more you practice those moves, the better you get at that first opening sequence of the chess game, and the more you repeat it, the better you get at like doing every single because every single conversation in your Chinese speaking life is going to start out with ni hao, and then, you know, especially if you're not visibly Chinese, the question you're very often likely to get is, why do you speak Chinese? Like, how do you speak Chinese? Why do you speak Chinese? So I think it's for me, it's always the thing that I try to learn first whenever I tackle a new language.
Cool. Yeah. Because you study it, not just like I know one sentence or something, right? It's like,
yeah, I mean, you try to learn you try to learn from as relevant and as common conversations you can have at first as possible.
Awesome. Really cool. Yeah, it is. I see the hurdle when it comes to pronunciation, but already I'm starting to visualize the words as representative of like concepts more than like an individual just word. Is that an okay way to start looking at Chinese?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people make the mistake of looking at like Chinese characters and being like, oh man, this character represents 5,000 years of like Chinese philosophy. But I think really it's like not real. I mean, it like, yes, behind some characters there are, and behind some words in Chinese, they do go back to like 5,000 years of, or really like 3,000 years of like Confucian history, and like you can really go deep, and but in like modern spoken Mandarin, it's really the same as English. Like it's just really a word.
Gotcha. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay, cool. Yeah. Lead me away. What's next?
Sweet. Yeah. Well. I mean, yeah. If you want to check out, if people watching this want to check out and I guess you too, John, want to check out the course. I mean, this is kind of how I teach Chinese, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like this street smart method. I'm calling it, where basically, it's like a 10-week course, which 10 lessons like this with videos where I sort of walk you through how to have these conversations, and they're designed really to be like the most basic, most common opening moves of the chess game that you could have to try to really get yourself to being able to have like basic conversations with people as quickly as possible. There's also a lot more in the course on pronunciation, and people who've taken the course, it's one of their favorite parts about it. They really like, how I break down pronunciation and tones and the letters. If you attend this workshop, there's a $30 discount. So you can just get that by clicking on the link below or in the email.
Yeah. Well, and sorry, I blindsided you a little. I was curious for the replay. Was there a part of this page that just gave the definitions to the words?
Oh, yeah. No.
Yeah.
For the replay, yes. Well, if you're watching the replay, I scrolled down over here. There's and then down here, you're not. I mean, yeah. If you, this PDF is if you want to get the course, the PDF is in the course. But if you want to screen grab, this is it's split off 2 different pages. So this is the first part, and then here is the second part of the vocab.
Sure, sorry. I should have been more clear, just because I know I already forget like a couple of them, so that helps out.
Right. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Cool. Well, and then real quick to all the viewers, we're about to go into like a formal like Q&A. So if you have, I know we already have a lot of like contextual questions. I have a feeling for the Q&A, we can hit a couple of the like, how do you pronounce this? Or how do you pronounce that? But if, since we only have a limited time today, if we can try and make questions a little more, with a little more substance, if you have bigger conceptual questions or specific questions about the course. I know you just mentioned the course. The link is available in the chat. It's pinned to the top. It'll also be emailed to you with the replay. And that offer is only for a week. So if you want to get on it, hop on it. And I did, as far as like where the course takes you by the end of the course, are you looking at like basic conversationalism, or is it really just a crash course on like the basics of Chinese? Where would you expect to be by the end of that course?
Yeah, so it's 10 lessons designed to be done over 10 weeks. Although again, it's like you have lifetime access to the course, so you can do it as slowly or as quickly as you want. And the idea is that all of these dialogues are really based around real world conversations that you might feasibly have in China or in New York City, Chinatown, or simply, with your Chinese friends or relatives. And they're really designed to get you speaking Chinese as quickly as possible without really, I think a lot of other courses and when I was learning Chinese at first, people tend to focus on things that I don't consider necessarily appropriate for beginners. Like they'll focus a lot on like particulars of grammar, or they'll focus on a lot on like the way that language is written or certain aspects of how the characters work. Whereas I try to expose students to just by osmosis as much as possible to the way that the language is really spoken. And of course, with these PDFs, there's all the grammar information is there if you want to just kind of dive in. But the idea is to get you in 10 weeks to being able to have like actual conversations in Chinese with people, which I think is really cool.
That makes so much sense because I know like in high school language was always taught like you need to understand every little detail before you can speak anything.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Right. Yeah. It's really a mess, I think, in high school.
Yeah. We have a ton of questions coming in, so I'm just going to start popping them up. I think this is a really good question. I know I struggle with this when I'm trying to learn a new language, but like, do you have a study routine when you're learning Chinese, or what is it? How do you tackle integrating it into your day?
Right. So with Chinese, I'm kind of like I don't to be honest, I don't really actively study Chinese anymore. Like I know in my YouTube titles, all like a perfect Chinese. I definitely don't have perfect Chinese. I'll be the first person to admit that. Like my Chinese is very good. It's not perfect. But I don't for me I don't really feel the need to improve my Chinese like dramatically. I'm satisfied with the level of Chinese that I have, and it would be difficult for me to discuss like philosophy or nuclear physics in Chinese, but I don't really feel like an urgent need to get myself to that level. So I don't really like actively study to that point. I mean, for me, of course, it's very, very important to maintain my Chinese. It's an important part of my life, and so I speak it every day.
Right.
So I think actually the question was, what was your study routine when learning Chinese?
Yeah.
That I can talk about. I don't know if any of you have ever used this app called Anki. It's I've talked about it in my videos before. It's a free like open source app that lets you this is a longer discussion, but it does this thing called spaced repetition, and it lets you memorize things very efficiently. So I used Anki to basically just write down what I would encounter. Like I would try to talk to people, and then I would use Anki to just kind of record what I encountered with people in real life. And then I would basically try to memorize what they said to me. I was like, wow, that's a great sentence that you just said to me. Let me write it down, and then I'm going to put it into my app and then just try to memorize it. And so I would
that's cool.
yeah, and I would just spend hours. And actually, there were points where I would just like, I remember just being in the library going over with a tutor. I'd be like, how do you say this? Because I would just have things where like, I was at a point with my Chinese where I could have a conversation, but I was like not really where I wanted to be. So I would just ask the tutors like, how do I say this? And then they would tell me, and I'd be like, oh, that's how you say it. And I would just write it down, and I would just put it into my flashcard app, and I would just memorize it.
That's so cool though, because then you're learning things you've already heard and know you want to know how to say, right? Versus like, where is my dog, Linda, or something.
Yeah, exactly. So I really tried to, and even today when I learn languages, I really try to memorize stuff that I've personally encountered contextually, so that when I memorize it, like I always have like a little cue in my brain being like, oh, I remember where I encountered this sentence, and that's where I needed to use it. So then it becomes more effective when I memorize it. So what I do in the course is I try to like replicate. Obviously, it's not that exact experience, but I try to kind of replicate that experience by making by like adding the Anki deck. So you can download all these sentences and memorize them in your own Anki, connected with the dialogues and where they're introduced.
That's I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, just we got a bunch of questions, so try and get through.
Sure.
Quite a few. Kind of relevant within like routine and stuff. Recommended Chinese movies or television shows to watch while you're learning?
Sure. So oh man, I mean, where to start with this? I would say for beginners, what's more important than using the media to learn the language, because it's difficult. Like, I mean, I think with any language, trying to learn from native level media is really hard. Like the audio goes by super fast, and it's really hard to understand what's being said. And especially with Chinese movies, like, I mean, even today, I can listen to a Chinese movie where they're like, it's set in the Tang Dynasty, and they'll be saying stuff with like these classical allusions that'll just go way over my head. I'll be like, what's going on here? But I would say that the best way to really use Chinese movies and television shows is for motivation, because like when you start really getting into like some good Chinese TV or like movies, you're like, wow, this is awesome. Like it's going to give you amazing motivation to want to learn language. I'll give you some great examples. So Ip Man, spelled IPMAN, is maybe my all-time favorite Chinese movie. It's just so cool. The story is about and it's a little bit unfair because it's a little bit Cantonese. There's Mandarin in the movie too, but it's a mix of Cantonese and Mandarin. But it's about a grandmaster of Wing Chun, and it's all about how he uses his kung fu abilities to to showcase like Chinese culture and Chinese martial arts. And it's just such an incredible movie for Chinese if you're learning Chinese, because you just watch him like beating everybody up and he's so badass. It's played by Donnie Yen, who's an incredible Hong Kong actor. And it's just going to give you so much motivation to like learn Chinese and kick ass with your Chinese like he does with his kung fu. So
love it.
Yeah. Also, another recommendation would be Stephen Chow movies.
Okay.
And some of these movies actually have been popular in the US, like Kung Fu Hustle or Shaolin Soccer. If you haven't seen those movies, the first thing you should do after finishing this video is go and watch those movies, because they're so funny, so incredible, and again, they're just going to give you lots of motivation for wanting to learn the language.
Love it. This is sorry for the viewers. I'm popping a question up, but a few of you have asked kind of relatively the same, which is, do you have an app or a link other than the course or something to help you practice? I know a couple other people were just saying they're at that intermediate phase.
Yeah.
One person was asking, how do you find people to speak Chinese with?
Right.
And so just that, like, when you've already got a little bit going, like your recommendation for the next level.
Great question. Yeah. So I've always liked Anki for, again, that's the flashcard app that I mentioned, for really trying to like memorize stuff. And you can download pre-made decks and like try to advance your knowledge by memorizing more stuff. I think it's a little boring. I think if you're like at the intermediate level and you really want to level up, I mean, you can do that by like watching movies or reading or speaking. I mean, I think, if you've seen my videos, my really preferred way to do that is speaking. And I think that in terms of like how do I actually do that, there's a few ways. I mean, there's language practice apps that you can. I mean, obviously you can pay for tutoring on a website like italki or Verbling or Preply or one of these. But there's also lots of free ways to do it. So an app called Hello Talk, just HelloTalk is great. And there's a lot of Chinese people on the app who want to learn English. And it's also really great because if you're an English speaker, lots of Chinese people want to learn English. So you can kind of, cross. I mean, look, obviously it's better to learn in person. So if when possible, if you live in like an area that has a lot of Chinese speakers, it's best to try to make friends with Chinese people in real life physically, because, having conversations with real people it just gives you more motivation, and it's going to be a great way to actually boost your motivation and really want to learn. But if you don't live in an area with Chinese speakers, you can, again, these apps like HelloTalk is good. Tandem is another good one that I really like. In video games too, VR chat. I've made videos in VR chat. Actually, if you just search Xiaoma NYC VR chat, you can find lots of videos where I practice Chinese in VR chat, and that's actually a great place to. Yeah, if you're not familiar with VR chat, it's like a video game where you're like a virtual avatar, and you can go to rooms that are like Chinese rooms that are set up for Chinese speakers, and so you can go there and you can just literally walk up to anybody and start practicing Chinese, and they'll be very helpful. And you'll also meet other people who are learning Chinese in those rooms too, although mostly it's Chinese speakers. So, and they'll be like super excited. Chinese people, the great thing about learning Chinese is that there's over 1 billion people in the world who speak Chinese, and they want to help you learn Chinese, because Chinese people, they love foreigners learning Chinese. And they always get very excited when a foreigner learns Chinese. And even if you're at that intermediate level and you only speak a little bit, don't be afraid to, go and try and practice. I mean, you'll really be surprised. Like people are super warm, and they'll really want to help you get to that next level. And even if you want to do again, Chinese people want to learn English, right? And so if you're in that situation where you're a native English speaker, it's very easy to find people to do in Chinese, it's called yuban, which is like a language partner. So you can do like a little language exchange where basically for like half an hour you speak in Chinese, and then for half an hour you speak in English, and you kind of get this like language partner. I used to do that all the time in China, and it's a really great way to meet people and find people to practice with and level up your Chinese.
Well, a quick tag on to like your courses. I know someone had asked in the chat, do you offer one-on-one tutoring yourself, but then also is there just a Discord or a group that like is there a community with the courses where people can maybe find other people to speak with?
Yeah,
Or
I
is that
used
not
to. Yeah, I used to. I used to do a live before I started offering this course on Teachable. I used to do a live course, and so we have a Discord chat set up there. I don't. I might do that in the future. The only thing that I would say, and one-on-one tutoring, I just because of time I can't really do it, but it's something that I might potentially offer in the future. So the only thing I would say is if you like the best way to learn about stuff like that in the future would be to just sign up for my email list, which is if you just go to my website, Xiaoma NYC, there's like a box and you can enter your email address. And if I am doing that in the future, then I'll definitely send out an email about it.
Awesome.
Yep.
I think we only got time for a couple more here, but
Cool.
I think this one might be relevant for people going and looking for Chinese resources.
Yeah.
Or can you just basically, Joria is asking, what is the difference between simplified and traditional Chinese?
Yeah, so it's a great question. There is it's also almost a little bit confusing because you think are there two versions of Chinese? Like what's going on here? You know, really no. So it's really just a distinction in the writing system. So the long and short of it is that in mainland China in like I think 1950 or around there, the traditional Chinese characters were simplified. It's called, and so you know, I think if you watch the replay there, I had an example of the character for horse, which you know, traditional characters looks like this is a bunch of like a lot of lines. In simplified, it looks like there's a lot less lines. The idea being it was to improve literacy. Whether that actually helped, there's kind of like a debate about it. But basically, the long and short of it is right now is that within mainland China, simplified Chinese is used to write stuff, right? Outside mainland China, so we're talking like many overseas Chinese communities, Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, traditional Chinese characters are used. Actually, Malaysia is an interesting case because they use a lot of simplified. Singapore too, kind of. But it's just a distinction in the writing system. So it's not like people don't. There are different accents in the whole Chinese speaking world, but this is just a distinction with writing, and it's not like I would say that people sometimes ask like, what do you learn first? In my course, I use simplified, but you know, like you could make an argument that it's better to learn traditional. It doesn't really, to be honest, it doesn't really matter because I think if you want to learn the characters, you're ultimately as a non-Chinese native speaker, if you want to learn the characters, I think it's really important to learn both at some point because you're going to encounter written materials in both. So unfortunately, the simplification of the Chinese characters has really just created a situation where there's essentially two competing writing systems, and there's a lot of overlap between them, but so it's not really like learning two different writing systems. It's almost like UK spelling versus US spelling. It's a little bit more than that. It's slightly more than that, but you probably want to learn both at some point.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. And then just, I think we can field one more question. Sorry for viewers. You all are asking tons of awesome questions. We're just a little limited on time. Gonna end on a fun note because I've always wondered this as well, which is how do you sing in Chinese? If there's
I understand.
you know,
Yeah.
like since you're dealing with a tonal
Oh
language,
my God, it's such a good question.
what is Chinese singing like?
It's such a good question, and the answer is a total mess. In terms of, yeah, no, not in terms of China. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean like it's difficult to understand Chinese that is being sung because of this problem.
Right.
So because when you're singing, you have to a lot of times just sort of disregard the tones. So yeah, the answer is that it does make the songs a lot harder to understand. And also because a lot of times classical Chinese, by the way, is a whole separate beast. It's like the Latin of the Chinese world where but it's still used a lot in modern China in certain fixed phrases and things. So it's really, it's like, this is why I advise people, like sometimes people are like, oh, I want to learn languages through songs. I don't advise that when you're starting out with Chinese, because it's just very difficult to do. And it's very difficult to understand songs and song lyrics in Chinese. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes there are more pop songs that are easier to understand. But a lot of the times, yeah, the answer is that it does make songs in Chinese harder to understand. But the one thing is you still can understand a lot, because in Chinese, even if your tones are off, you can still, there's still a lot of room for understanding, because the tones are not like destiny. Like there are, it's almost like if you mess up the intonation in English, you can still understand what's being said. Like if I'm talking like this and I ask a question and it doesn't really sound like perfect, you can still kind of understand what I'm like. You don't it doesn't have to be exactly there all. Like there are certain words, like for example, the word ma means mother and the word ma means to criticize.
Right.
So like, yeah, if you get the tone right, but from context, you know, if I'm talking about what my mother did the other day and I accidentally said ma or ma instead of ma, people are going to understand you from context. Right. So it's not the worst thing in the world if you don't get the tones, but in many cases it's essential for understanding. But it's not as though you completely lose all meaning.
Right. So film, like movies, stuff like that is a better place to start.
Yes, movies or TV shows. One other example that I forgot with TV shows, if you want something that's good for language, is there's a really good kids TV show. It's kind of like, I would call it the SpongeBob of China, called Xi Yang Yang. I forget the English name. Let me look this up really quick. Animation show. It has a lamb, and it's called something with a lamb. Oh yes, no, it's called Pleasant Goat and Big Wolf. Pleasant Goat and Big Wolf. Yeah, it's great because the language is relatively simple, but also like the animation is really great, and it's a really funny show that it's designed as a kids show. But again, like SpongeBob, it's a kids show, but it's also like, you know, my brothers and I still quote SpongeBob with each other to this day. Like it's, you know, just like it just has that like legendary status in China. So it's a really good show.
Awesome. Yeah. Dude, thank you so much. I don't want to take up too much of your time or the viewers. We're kind of wrapping up here. To everyone watching, I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question. You all have been very active, and I love it. Also, I have noticed if you take a second and go read through some of the comments, there's been some really helpful people answering some of these questions while we've been going. If you like this video, if you enjoy learning stuff like this, please like and subscribe to the Discover channel. Trying to bring more people like Xiaoma. Xiaoma, I appreciate your time so much. Did you
appreciate you guys?
Thank you. Yeah. Before we part, did you have any last kind of words of wisdom to people starting their Chinese learning journey, or any little nugget we can leave them with?
I mean, it'll change your life. That's the only thing I could say. If you get to the point where you're, and it takes a little bit of effort to get there for sure, but if you get to the point where you can speak like even at an intermediate level of Chinese, I mean, it's gonna like, yeah. I mean, for me, it just totally changed my life, and it gave me like a whole another like life, a whole separate soul in a different language that I could use to talk to people. And it was so cool to be able to just like go and do stuff in Chinese and meet people in Chinese. And it was like, wow, this is amazing. And I loved it. And yeah, I think you know, like it's not easy to get there, and it definitely takes a lot of effort and work. But once you get to that point, like, you're gonna love it. It's gonna be the most amazing thing.
Love it. I love that. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Cool.
And thank you everyone watching. Please shout out in the chat. Thank Xiaoma with me, and let us know something you learned that you were excited about. Holler if you just appreciate it, and have a wonderful day, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks everybody for watching.
Cheers.